You're listening to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast. Once again, I'm Rick and I'm here with Anna and Paul. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Just got more game books in the mail, so I've been busy going through them. It's
Awesome.
Book Bonanza Week.
Bonanza Week? Okay. You seem to not want to expand on that, so we'll just take your word for it. That's Bonanza Week. Paul, how are you doing?
Good. I'm going to be careful not to back myself into a corner with words like bonanza. I'm just going to leave it there. I'm bloody good.
All right. Well, just before we begin, I just want to give a quick shout out to our friends at 242, the husband and wife developing team behind upcoming indie point-and-click adventure game Capia, whose Kickstarter campaign started about a week ago as of time of recording, and are sitting at just about half of their crowdfunding goal. As much as we all consider pixel art to be the golden age of gaming, their 3D adventure game has some pretty big Double Fine vibes to it. And they themselves say that they take a lot of inspiration from LucasArts and Sierra games, amongst other all-time greats like The Longest Journey, Siberia, and Still Life, I think they mentioned. So please, let's make their game happen. Go to Kickstarter.com and look up Capia, that's K-A-P-I-A. Download their demo and give them your support. The classic gaming community especially needs to be supporting the indie devs who are trying to carry the torch forward. It is absolutely in our best interest to vote with our dollars and show that people still want these games. Anyways, on to our episode for today. We are going to be talking about educational games, something that Anna and Paul have a lot of experience with, thanks to raising children of their own. But since I have absolutely nothing to contribute to this conversation myself, I brought in a ringer. We have a special guest this week. She has a doctorate in instructional technology, and her research and dissertation focused on game-based learning. Welcome to the show, Dr. Leslie Markley.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to finally have you on. We've been wanting to get you on the show for a little bit. We actually had the topic, the educational games, sitting on the list for quite a while. But like I said, I've been kind of ignoring it as a possible episode because I just have nothing to really say on this. But, first of all, why don't you... I know you're probably tired of talking about your dissertations as you've had to actually do it and present it and defend it. And that was actually not even all that long ago. But maybe you just want to give us a little brief summary about what about what you covered in that.
Sure. So for my dissertation, I was looking at game-based learning for heritage language learners, which are people that have grown up being exposed to a language other than English or a dominant language. And they sometimes have a lot of anxiety around speaking the other language that they're exposed to. So I built this great little virtual reality mystery game. And it's got an AI in it that they can talk to and have a conversation with and solve this little mystery. And it was really well received by everybody that participated in the research. They thought that it was great. It did good at lowering their levels of anxiety. The only big problem we had, of course, with virtual reality is some of them had some anxiety about getting motion sick. So that was a little bit of a problem. But, we didn't have that with the educational games that we were playing growing up, of course.
Well, I think in the Classic Gamers Guild, even there are so many people that are in there that did not have English as their first language, and yet they speak and spell very fluently. And a lot of people attribute that to being playing adventure games and sort of using that as an educational standpoint growing up, having to use the parser and eventually even hearing the game talk back to you things that you read and clicked on. It really is all encompassing as far as language goes. So, when you are looking at that side of things, is that something that you take into consideration?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that I think is a really positive effect. And one of the really great things about game-based learning and about learning from games is even if you fail at something, and I think this is something that as gamers we're all used to, failure is not, if you're talking to a person in person and you mess up, it's like, oh my God, I'm going to lay awake and think about this at night for years to come. If you mess up in a game, it's like, okay, well, let's do that again. It's a challenge, and you can learn from the failures and from repeating things. So I think that it's definitely something. And, just talking about language, even as a native English speaker, I've learned words from adventure games. I learned the word procure from one of the Fantasy Star games, because every time I opened a chest, it was, you've procured such and such.
But because you're having to think about it in a few different ways. I myself, I don't think I would have really been good at English, but it ended up being the only one subject that I actually excelled at a little bit, and playing the games led to reading books. I started playing games where I had to read before I actually started picking up books and reading through them in the way that you do once you get into it. So, it can lead you in all different directions.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's one of the best sort of ways that this type of learning can work, because you can sit down and play a game where it expressly tells you, I'm going to teach you this, and okay, well, what if you don't learn that? Then was the game successful? But if it's a game where you sit down and you play it and you see something and you say, hey, that's really interesting, I want to learn more about that, I think probably lots of us can relate to learning about different folklore from Quest for Glory games, or, stuff like that, like we were talking about. Or, I think even some of the fairy tales that got tied into the King's Quest games, I wound up going, I don't know this story. I should probably know this. And then, it leads to reading. And then, it's sort of fostering the learning from that. And I think when people think, edutainment or learning from games, they're thinking like very concrete, like math blasters. But, it's not always those titles that are expressly there to teach you something that are what you're learning.
Well, it's funny because I'm pretty sure, not this necessarily educational, but at least for training software, I've never actually used Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing, but I actually became a fast typer because I played the old Sierra games with the text parser. So like more so than I think I took keyboarding 9 and I kind of sucked back then. But I really do think that even more so than learning through any program that taught me keyboarding was just actually using it because I wanted to, and just like gained that muscle memory from typing, throw dagger, open door, sit down, and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, we'd recently discussed in, I think it was the Change One Thing episode. Anna, you brought up, you didn't like the earlier AGI games that didn't pause the game for you when you typed. And in hindsight, I guess that taught Rick and a lot of us to type fast because the game wouldn't stop for you. So we got pretty bloody good at it.
Fast and accurately.
Yeah. And as far as learning from playing a game, I think the one game I probably learned the most from wasn't edutainment, but it was Gabriel Knight 2, because the way Jane Jensen kind of interwove history with fiction, she blurred this line where I became obsessed on wanting to know which was fiction, what parts of that did she write, because it all seemed so believable. So I was up for nights in a row researching, Ludwig and Wagner and Princess Elizabeth and this and that, and became pretty efficient in something that I'll never use, even in conversation besides now. But alas, I did learn a thing.
Well, I was actually even mentioning too that I don't think I've ever learned anything from a game that really touted itself as edutainment. So even games that I really liked, like Carmen Sandiego, I never actually learned anything from that other than just had fun playing a game. But I don't know what flags look like. I can't identify a flag. I know what a flag looks like, but I can't identify any flags. I can't. I don't know information about cities that they wanted me to look up. I know how to look at an almanac and find the thing they want and then forget about it immediately.
That's the same as playing Cross Country Canada. My God, I loved that game. And you learned about provinces and cities and states. And the only thing I really remember from that game is that you get potatoes in PEI. But I spent a lot of time on it, and I researched it, and I looked into things to do with it. But you know what I did learn? Again, you mentioned it earlier, Leslie. I learned how to research. I learned how to connect things up. I learned about navigation and timing. I learned as a trucker, you need to sleep occasionally or you're going to crash.
That's a very good lesson to learn.
And much better to learn it there than driving a truck.
Right?
It's about that low stakes thing again. See, it's about the better environment. And yeah, Rick, I'm with you on the Carmen Sandiego thing. I couldn't find, a bunch of countries on a map if you said, here, where is this? I have no idea. But I'm really good at looking stuff up and skimming through a document really quick to find things now, which I was really happy when I got to high school and college and discovered that was a skill I'd picked up from Carmen Sandiego.
Nice.
Yeah, and reading quickly. I think all of our reading skills were just hastened due to the nature of playing computer games. Like, I understand there's static moments where things wait, but there's other times where you have to read through stuff because stuff's just going to happen.
Well, I guess the one thing, an interesting learning experience from video games was back, I forget what grade I was, but Police Quest was like the one game that I had, or at least the one adventure game that I had. I don't think I think it was like, I think it was while I was still playing that, and it's like the only game that I had on my PC. And the teacher at school assigned us to present to the class, or not really present, but like ask her at the next class 2 words that we found that we didn't know what it meant. So basically we had to do whatever. As we come across words that we don't know, we would write them down, come to class the next day, tell the teacher the words that we learned, and she'll explain what they are. So I went home and played Police Quest that night, and the next day when she asked me, it was my turn to present 2 words that I didn't know, I said homicide and narcotics.
Those are big words.
Yeah, and this is like grade 4 or something, like around that area, like grade 3 to 4. That's around perfect. That time. So it's like, oh, so what are the 2 words you learned? Homicide and narcotics.
Oh, little Rick.
Oh, boy. At least you didn't, claim that you learned how to drive a submarine from playing Codename Iceman. So we have that,
No, nobody will ever claim that. Although, that's the problem. That's why it was so hard. It was actually based on the actual training manual and how it was supposed to work, because realism to the nth degree, right?
Right. And you know what I did learn from that game? I'm pretty sure it was Codename Iceman, but where you had to give CPR at the very beginning, and you had to exactly type in from the manual like to the step.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like my first experience with that, and that was probably the only reason I knew any of the CPR stuff at age, 10, 11, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Man, I would love to hear a story where somebody learned some sort of a medical thing like CPR from a classic computer game and actually used it to save somebody's life. Like, if that happened to you out there, listeners, please write in and let us know. And I'm pretty sure we would read that out on a show.
See, it's those unintentional lessons. Like the other one that people always talk about is Oregon Trail. And
yes,
it's funny when I talk to, friends and stuff about it. I say, what did you learn from Oregon Trail? They say, well, I didn't really learn anything. I just shot buffalo and and then we start talking about it. And the funny thing that keeps coming up, I said, well, how did you finally win the game? You won at some point, right? I said, well, yeah, I took the banker because you get the most money. So we all learned at a very early age that capitalism is the way to successfully get to Oregon, apparently. That was what we took away from. But, it's interesting because that game gets held up so often as like, the first experience a lot of us had with learning from a game. And, it's not without its flaws, but it's just so interesting that it's kind of a universal experience and people took such different things away from it, even if they think they didn't learn anything.
Yeah, I learned how to gamble from Oregon Trail. Basically, every time it was my turn to cross a river, and I rolled that bloody dice, thinking I could just get across without paying for a ride.
I didn't actually play Oregon Trail in elementary school. It wasn't until like much later. So I kind of wish I did, just because instead of homicide and narcotics, I wish I could have presented dysentery to the class.
Exactly.
And actually, that's one of the interesting criticisms I've read of Oregon Trail, is that the dysentery thing, apparently some historians are really angry that became a meme, because it's like dysentery is a terrible, horrible way to die. And Oregon Trail has taught us that, haha, you died from diarrhea. That's, great to put on, your friend's tombstone. But, it was actually a terrible thing that people were getting from dirty water sources. So it's just...
Yeah, so I guess I learned two things from Oregon Trail. One was how to gamble, and the other was that it is possible to shit yourself to death. Horrendous.
One day you're playing Oregon Trail and you're dying of dysentery, and the next day that you are getting eaten by a whale and thinking it's all okay.
Yeah.
As long as you can climb up the tongue, it's fine,
It's the hardest part, man. Yeah, that was the first time I ever encountered an in-joke, and I hadn't played the game that the in-joke was based on, when you pick up the bottle with the message in it from inside the whale. So it was like that moment, I knew something was up, but I didn't really know what was up. And then later on, you play Space Quest or whatever, and you find out that it's actually like an in-joke from another game, and it takes it to another level. I mean, you got to learn something from that too. Mm-hmm. Making connections, right? Long-term connections.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that whale thing, I think one thing that we can all say we picked up from the game, even if it's not knowledge you acquire, it's skills you acquire, patience, and being willing to retry things, because I don't know how many times I fell off that whale's tongue, but it was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're literally mapping it out pixel by pixel. I remember that, like putting my finger on the screen. No, I have to go to this dot right here or I'm going to fall. And everything was slow. Like the game was slow. So I remember, you fall and it takes 4 or 5 times longer than it does nowadays. Now you're just like, blip, oh, you fell, try again. But back then it was kind of a big deal. Like I made it this far and now I'm going to fall. Oh, man. Even if you can't, and that's the other big deal, even if you can't do something properly, keep doing it wrong, because, as a human being, you won't do it wrong forever. It's just not possible. Eventually, you'll be better.
I want to know if anyone ever actually played Quest for Glory, then spent a day just throwing rocks.
Outside. We want to hear from you.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see the statistics behind it too. Did they improve? Did their aim get better?
Were they able to knock a nest out of a tree and potentially find lost items?
Yeah.
I want to know if anybody put that lockpick up their nose. That's what I'm dying to know.
Exactly. Like, how do you know when your experience level is high enough to be able to do that? Do you have to just prod gently while, be curious? Because there's no restore button in real life that I know of.
So especially, as I mentioned before, Anna and Paul, you've actually raised kids with educational games. And of course, Leslie, that's your field of specialty. What are your favorite, or what do you think are possibly the best examples that you can think of for games out there that would really benefit kids and developing children, or possibly even adults maybe?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that every kid, when your kid is 2 and they're tired of just sitting on your lap watching you play, you pull out the original Jumpstart Toddlers game, the one that came out in the 90s, not the newer one that came out. And they teach you cause and effect. Hit a key on the keyboard, something happens on the screen, locks out even your Windows key, right? And then the other thing is you give a dog a bone, and the mouse is the bone, and it's giant, and it's on the screen, and your kid literally has to pass it left or right to make the dog eat it and get a reward. So it's like, that is like the fundamental thing, like this. And I guess I'm thinking before touchscreens, right? Because before touchscreens, that was the first time a child could really understand that they could interact with the computer. They could make something happen. They had not only a choice, but a difference in that little world on the screen. So to me, that's a great starting place. I hear you nodding, Paul. Have you had experience with any of the Jumpstart games?
Yeah, exactly. I started my son off with Jumpstart. I forgot which one. It was early 90s. The only thing I've ever found in a thrift store, and I bought it just to buy an old PC game in a thrift store. Ended up using it, but like you said, the mouse thing, that was the most important, because he's got a tablet and touchscreens and stuff, but I wanted him to also understand how I'm doing what I'm doing, and just how to use a computer and such. So you're absolutely right. It was everything that he's into now, like Roblox and Minecraft and this and that, he couldn't be into if it wasn't for Jumpstart, just teaching him those basic fundamentals. And the other thing that they do right, that every edutainment game has to do right, is be fun enough. Because if it's not interesting, they're not into it. So Jumpstart did a really good job of that too.
Yeah, quick reward for the cause and effect. I don't know if either of you, I was never a really big fan of games like Math Blaster, or especially Reader Rabbit. I found Reader Rabbit in particular was kind of boring. It was too much reading and not enough reward, not enough magic and stars. I don't know, but it never caught the attention of any of my kids.
Same, yeah.
But the Muppets Sorting and Ordering, which came out in 1997 and has clips of live-action Muppet scenes mixed with learning about numbers and letters in the alphabet, or Elmo's World, or Learning in Toyland, those were all great 90s educational games. If you wanted to sit with your kid and teach them that, they can bake cookies or have an effect on the real world, those are great places to go too. Or Tonka Workshop. It's got a keyboard tool overlay where you put like a whole literal tool set over top of your keyboard, and there's like a hammer thing you can pound and a saw and things you can screw, and it teaches you motor skills, and you get to build things in the game and get rewards like, oh, the bridge is broken. You're like, I'll help. And then you do.
I don't know if kids would enjoy the game as much as you seem to.
Okay, kids, time to watch me play educational games again. But nowadays with the tablets, it's stuff like Toca Boca. It's pretty easy to teach them cause and effect. You put anything on the screen and they touch the screen and things happen. So my youngest was on a tablet and using screen-based things just as young too. I think most kids are now.
Yeah, I'd have to give a big shout out to a non-edutainment franchise titles that my son loves, and they do a great job of teaching, which is the Microsoft Home line of software. And they have, if this rings a bell to you, any you lot or any listeners, let's see, so like Dangerous Creatures, Dogs, Dinosaurs, there's a whole line of them, and they're just minorly interactive books in a sense. Like a quick example is like Dangerous Creatures gives you a picture of the atlas, and you click where you want to go in the globe. It shows you the animals that are indigenous to that area. He picks an animal, and then it'll show you like a 15-second video clip of the animal. And then there's a bunch on the screen as a parent you could read to them. That's no fun for either of us, so we just watch the video clips and move on. But the Microsoft Home line is really cool. It's a kind of a twist in edutainment. It's disguised edutainment, but it's really more of like an interactive encyclopedia.
Just talking about Microsoft, I think one that people don't think about, because it's not exactly a game, but there's still so much learning potential, is opening up Paint and letting kids go crazy with that, because there's colors, there's shapes, there's the hand-eye coordination with the mouse, unless you're, using a computer with a touch screen. But, there's cause and effect of putting things over each other, and they get a little bit of that object permanent stuff, and there's just so much you can do with just the simple drawing programming.
Did you say Paint?
Yeah,
MS Paint.
You're so
wow.
right. I used to have this, my older kids, I used to do this thing when they were younger, and I'd say, okay, you can draw in MS Paint for 20 minutes, and whatever you have on the screen at the end of 20 minutes will print. And that meant they could do 20 different drawings, but it kept them engaged long enough. They wanted the reward of printing it to see what they made. So they'd stay longer in the program, and they would either keep enhancing what they were doing or recreate it. It didn't matter, right? But they loved that program.
Yeah, it's a really good one. And I think the other thing that I'm doing right now with my 5-year-old is playing. So one of my the best pieces of advice I think I got as a parent, I don't know who it came from. It's probably, someone I never met, somebody historical and or famous or whatever. But one of the best pieces of advice I got was teach your child, not teach them what to think, but teach them how to think. And so it's something I keep in the back of my mind, on a daily basis. And that's why I really like the Humongous Entertainment games, the adventure games from Humongous, which is Ron Gilbert's company after LucasArts. And they're not edutainment, they're just adventure games for kids. It's an adventure game with easy puzzles, I guess you could say, and a kid-friendly plot. But I like those a lot. He likes them a lot. But I think the best thing about them is it's teaching him how to think. And not to say that other pure edutainment games teach kids what to think and not how to think. I think they do both wonderfully. But I like the adventure game approach because it really is, instead of him memorizing equations or things like that. Can you say equations when it's like 1 + 2? Is that still an equation?
Yeah,
even
it's
if it's
still an
simple?
equation.
It's an equation,
yeah.
Okay, nice. It just sounds so fancy for 1 + 2. But anyway, I like how it teaches him, how to think, how to solve a problem or a puzzle. So yeah, the Freddy Fish and Pajama Sam, especially for him, and
Well, they're in order. Yeah. Because it's like Freddy Fish is the easiest, and then Pajama Sam and Putt Putt's technically next, and then Pajama Sam, and then you get into Spy Fox, which is like the 11 and 12 set. So they really do cover the whole ages 4 to 11 kind of. They're really great games.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I actually got stuck in Pajama Sam 3. Like, legitimately kind of stuck for a while. You've hit a low point when you're Googling a walkthrough for Pajama Sam. Not proud of that.
They were a great start to getting the kids into adventure games in the first place. I used them as sort of a soundboard to get them used to the idea, caring about the characters. And so, yeah, they were fun.
And adventure games are really kind of a great conduit in and of themselves, because you've got a linear story for the most part, so there's not a lot of ways that you can get too far off track, which is great, especially with younger learners. You're not going to have them going off doing, who knows what, but you've got kind of that nice linear story, and you've got very finite goals. You've got things in your inventory, you've got puzzles to solve, and they're usually pretty clear about what the goal you're working toward is. And if they do a good job, then they also make you feel really smart when you solve a puzzle. And that's, I think something that I really have an appreciation for, even, in games that have puzzles now, because sometimes the puzzles are just so hard that, you're not doing any analytical thinking. It's just, kind of crazy logic. But just as a funny example, my husband, I got him playing the Room VR, which is kind of if you've played any of the Room games, it's really just a series of puzzles upon puzzles upon puzzles, and that's the whole game.
That's right.
And he solved one of them today that I hadn't been able to, and he was so excited about it. And I don't see him get excited about stuff playing games, but it's like you feel so smart when you figure out the solution to these things.
It's definitely a different feeling when you finish a game all on your own or a puzzle than if you look it up and finish it. It's a different kind of sense of accomplishment. We get that little dopamine hit if we do it ourselves.
Yeah.
It just feels so good.
Yeah, and just especially when you really have to, think and I don't know how common this is now, honestly, with games, but I remember back when I was playing adventure games, sometimes there would be puzzles where it would be like, I couldn't come up with the answer, and so I would go and ask family, and then I'd have my family talking about this stuff. And I'm actually thinking about this the riddle stones in Conquest for Camelot. There were a couple that
Definitely.
I could not do. And so I'd go and I'd get my mom and I'd say, Mom, look at this riddle. I can't solve this. And she'd look at it for a while. Well, let's go get your uncle. And then it turns into like, this kind of larger learning experience, getting family involved.
Yeah, I had the exact same experience with that game. And, to this day, I love those riddles. And I've always loved riddles. It sent me on a quest to look into more riddles. I'd go to the library and get books about riddles. And I actually thought I was so smart because not only did I know them, but I knew the answers and none of my friends did. And it was neat.
Interesting. I'm not sure if this really affects learning or anything like that, but I do notice, having played a few adventure games, there's one thing that does kind of... it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine, and it's kind of related in that there are sometimes when there'll be a puzzle and I've already like solved it in my head. I'm feeling like real proud of myself that I know the answer to this thing. And then one of the characters will just like explain the answer before I can even do anything, where it's like, I have a hammer in my inventory, let's say. I need to break this rock. I know this is like really simple. I just can't think of anything off the top of my head, but it's like, we need to break this rock. And I'm like, aha, I have a hammer. I can use the hammer on that rock. And then, one of the characters will be like, hey, didn't you find a hammer a while ago? Why don't you use that to break the rock? And like,
no.
Thanks. That was, I know. Thank you for giving me the chance to actually do that.
So I would say it definitely does have a negative impact on learning because, kind of geeking out about education for a minute, what you want to keep learners in is called the zone of proximal development, which is this kind of perfect state of learning where you start going into kind of like a state of flow where you lose track of time, but you get there by having a perfect balance of challenge and reward. And it's a really hard thing to do and to craft right. And when you take away that challenge, you get it sided where, now it's like you said, now it's not rewarding anymore, and it takes them right out of that zone. So I think that it's in that sense, I think it would negatively impact it, and I think it's also kind of, I would say maybe demoralizing because
completely, yeah.
It's like I've played games where the tutorial at the beginning has just driven me crazy because they'll, it's like you said, you've got a hammer in your inventory and you've got 3 people telling you, have you tried using that hammer yet? Well, give me a minute. I'm working on it.
Yeah, you feel annoyed instead of accomplished.
Yeah. I think that happens a few times throughout Ace Attorney. I think that's like the one that I'm thinking of, where, you got to investigate the clues to find the contradictions. And then like in the course of like a stream of dialogue, they'll say, okay, here's what we need to do. I'm like, I know how to do that because I remember the detail. I know exactly how to counteract this. And then they'll be like, you might want to check that letter that you found. I'm like, thanks. Yeah, I know that. I'm the one who found it. I know what's in there.
Do you realize I'm a Sierra gamer? Come on.
Not to say I don't love those games, because I do absolutely love those games, but they are very guilty of doing that quite a few times per game.
And I could never get into those, and I think that might have been part of the reason why, just because I think, and I don't know if it was just me being misinformed, but I was thinking of them as I'm having to solve this mystery and figure out this crime. And then when you're going and giving me clues like that, well, that's not much of a mystery, is it then?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's the point of the game if you're taking that thrill of figuring it out away from me?
Yeah.
Is it just like a story, an interactive story then, or is it a game too?
It's a game.
Mm-hmm.
And it is actually really fun because the writing and the comedy is on point.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm laughing out loud when I play those games. I think that's kind of what keeps me going through it. Mm-hmm. And some of the puzzles are actually pretty good. It's not like they're all like that, but I just know that there are times where I am really like stoked. Like, okay, come on, finish talking so I can present this evidence because I know exactly what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And before they finish talking, one of the characters will like lean over to me and be like, "Psst, hey, you might want to check the murder weapon. There's something there." It's like,
That would be annoying.
You want to shout at the computer. I already knew that. Like he's trying to have trying to prove a point as if the computer's sentient or something in that moment. Like, I just want you to know that I knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to sneer at you a little bit, computer, for telling me that, and I want you to feel that sneer.
It's too bad because in those games are really like some of the most rewarding feelings that I've had from solving puzzles. Mm-hmm. Because when they don't give it away, when they do kind of give you a chance to figure it out, and I do like kind of like look through all the stuff in my inventory, I'm like, that's the thing I presented, and then I like throw it into the guy's face. It's like, it really is rewarding, and it's great when that happens. And that just makes it worse when at those times when they deprive you of that.
Yeah.
That's actually one reason that I was kind of intrigued by that whole Law Quest thing that came up, because I feel like we haven't had and I know this is deviating a little bit from the educational thing, but I feel like we haven't had a really solid kind of courtroom game, because, on one end, we've got Ace Attorney, which is doing, like you were saying, occasionally giving you too much on the clues. And the only other one I'm thinking of off the top of my head is Danganronpa, which is at the opposite end of the scale, which doesn't give you any clues, and it puts you under a time limit. And
oh God.
It just gets increasingly stressful watching the timer count down and going, I'm still not making this connection. I feel like we need a middle of the road on this. Maybe there needs to, and maybe that would spark interest for people. Maybe that, well, I don't know that we need more lawyers in the world, but maybe it would spark some interest.
Maybe we could sympathize a little bit more with the lawyers if we knew what was going on their side of things with a little bit of accuracy and humor. Mm-hmm. For games that I think are satisfying, I can look at my 10-year-old and I can tell you the holy trio of games, and these are the games that he essentially lives off of, and that would be Civilization 3, Panzer General, and Heroes of Might and Magic. Well, okay, 4, sprinkled with liberal doses of Minecraft, just in creative as well as some player versus player. Mm-hmm. So I lied. It's not a holy trio. It's a holy quadruple of games. But literally that is what he lives for. And he has different people in the household that he'll play different games with. He'll play Minecraft with his dad, and they've got the city they've been spending years building. It's huge. It has, ways to transport yourself. You can go on trains above or below ground. There's mines, there's gyms, there's all that, Civilization or Heroes of Might and Magic. We can play Hot Seat. So he plays it with all the members of the family. So here we are having a conversation over the breakfast table about worldwide politics, and nobody even knows that any of us are learning, but we all are. So that's great for kids and adults.
Yeah, I think when the education is snuck in, that's perhaps the ideal situation. You can get away with otherwise, when they're younger, 4, 5, 6, 7, perhaps with things like Jumpstart, where it's just in your face edutainment. But I think the games you mentioned, Anna, that's kind of ideal, especially when you get into, 7 to 14 or whatever. It's probably better off that you sneak it in and you don't realize you're learning, because I think an edutainment game to today's youth could potentially just be a red flag. Like, hold on, mate, this is the weekend. I'm not supposed to be doing a learning right now. Yeah,
if I gave him like a Jumpstart grade 5, he'd look at me and be like, are you serious? Just play it when you want to. Oh, okay, I'll get right to that, Mom.
It teaches them to play outside.
Just what you were saying about sort of sneaking in the learning in the entertainment. I think that's really critical, especially with, like you were saying, with older kids, but also with adults, which, I think a lot of people kind of discount, oh, well, you don't really learn things from games as an adult, but you absolutely can. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just when it's really critical to try to, sneak it in as fun, and then realize later, oh, I learned something from that. Because, when we're adult learners, we already have, we have life experience. We kind of have in our mind, our way of doing things, and oh, I should know this. So having it snuck in, that's kind of great. And for me, I was just thinking the last game that I really, really learned something from was Portal, because when I took physics in high school, my teacher, bless his heart, was also the football coach, and he was explaining everything in terms of football. I could have cared less about football. But, he would say, okay, vectors. So if a quarterback gets tackled at 30 degrees, and I'm just sitting there going, huh? I have no idea what you're talking about. But then, years later, I was playing Portal, and I realized I was starting to kind of think about, and if, momentum and preservation of momentum and all that. And then I realized, and I told my friend, I said, I think I just learned more about physics from playing this game than I did from my high school class.
Right. So you got some great music to play along with at the same time.
Yes, and biting commentary, witty biting commentary, which, I'm pretty sure that wouldn't have made it any better in a classroom setting, but in a game, it was great.
In a game? Yeah. Teaching you to endure bullying.
Mm-hmm. We play a game like Space Quest and we're like, oh, Roger, you're such a ninny. But at the same time, the narrator's talking to you. Yeah. And we love it.
Oh, yeah. I'm just curious, for the three of you, what do you think's the last time you actually learned something from a game? And Rick, I know you said that you don't know if you've ever learned anything from,
Yeah. I think I learned from Ultima 7 that you bake bread by dumping water on flour and throwing it into a fire.
Spot on, yeah.
Yeah. Every time I make it, that's my technique, Ultima style.
It can also be blood or milk.
You just need something wet and something dry. I mean, two basic ingredients there.
I'm sure you'll get like a Michelin star in cooking, Mama, for doing that much effort.
Otherwise, for a serious answer, I'll have to think about that for a second, so I'll defer to the rest of you for now.
I think I'm always learning tactics because I'm playing a lot of these war-based games. Even we were playing the new Axis and Allies game that was available on Steam, and I'm learning about tactics. Like, I always end up separating my troops and dividing them up too much, and then push comes to shove at the end when I need a power army, all my little armies end up getting dwindled off into nothing. So lately I've been learning to try to keep power in the capital and not to spread my troops too thin when I'm trying to defend my borders and to really try to focus more on defending important borders versus defending all my borders. And, that's kind of a strategy I hadn't thought about before. And, a lot of these strategies that we learn in games or in sports, you can transfer into real life. Like, don't leave your stuff unprotected. Don't scatter your resources too far across the map. Or when you actually need to have the energy to get work done, you won't be able to pull your resources together. So that's important for me to learn.
And pick your battles.
Definitely pick your battles. And if you don't pick your battles right, other battles will probably pick you. And if there's a problem and you don't solve it, it'll still get solved. You just won't be able to have input on how it's solved.
Yeah, those are a lot of good ones. Like, especially don't leave your stuff unprotected. I think I learned from Leisure Suit Larry to wear a condom.
Exactly. If you don't, your privates will flash and then, you'll have to get remade. That's bad.
Or even worse, there'll be the murmurings of a child in the background of a podcast that Rick has to constantly edit out. So it's really important.
Oh, that keeps happening to me too. Jeez.
I learned that water can sometimes certainly.
Certainly can. The jokes around here certainly. Well, Rick, there's something, you were talking about playing Phantasy Star 2, and I was just thinking about that, the dungeons and the mapping and, keeping track of where you've been and which way you're going and being able to read a map. That's a skill I definitely got from that game. It was,
right.
Being able to sit and figure out where the heck I was going.
Mm-hmm.
Damn straight. I was the only girl I knew that could read a map, and on every car ride we ever took, I read a map, and I would draw a map sometimes when we were going places. And of course, that's all because I had to draw maps to play like all of the games that we ever played.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I always think of, I guess your point is that I always think of learning as just like something I didn't know and now I know, as opposed to like developing a skill. So, obviously by this point in time, I've read maps and followed maps, but like, using them, with the grid paper and the dungeons and, be it Phantasy Star 2 or Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, it's just exercising that skill and just kind of making you gradually better at it without me realizing. Because, I would never have thought about that until you just put that in perspective.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, it's not always the classroom book type things. Sometimes it's just those skills that we pick up, like, like you said at the very beginning, just the being able to type quickly, or, in the AGI games where it didn't pause it for you, being able to point your character in a direction and type while they're walking and multitask and have that hand-eye coordination.
Yeah. It's because of Sierra AGI I can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. It's part of the foundation.
All right, so just before we wrap up, any final thoughts on educational games or education in games?
Yeah, I guess my closing thought on it is just, always be willing to learn things, and the next time you play a new game, think about those things where you say, oh, I want to know more about that, or even just something you want to try, because, I think that a lot of times we think, immediately we hear learning from games and it's like, oh, this is going to be boring, and it doesn't have to be, and it doesn't have to be, learning facts. It can be learning skills. And the example that I'm thinking of to end with is when I played Dagger of Amun-Ra. I had never heard, and you're going to laugh when you hear this, it wasn't the cool Egyptology. It wasn't anything like that. I had never heard of using a water glass to spy at a door before. And so when Christmas came,
Perfect.
When Christmas came, I tried, I think, every glass in the kitchen, trying to listen at doors to see if I could find out what I was getting for presents. And I was deeply disappointed to find out it didn't work as well as it did in the game. But, it was again, that learning experience, it was something that I never knew you could do, and I never would have thought to do.
Well, unfortunately, I do think that's all the time we have for this episode, but thank you very much, Dr. Markley, for joining us in this conversation and enlightening us on a lot of different things that I didn't really think of before. So I guess I learned something from talking to you.
I definitely enjoyed being on with you guys tonight and talking about this, because I think it is a topic that people don't always give a lot of thought to, but it's something that can be a lifelong thing for us as gamers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much again for joining us. You're always welcome back on the show anytime, and until then, we will see you around in the Classic Gamers Guild Facebook group.
Indeed.
Now, just before we get to the closing of the show, I just wanted to read out an email that I received in regards to our, I guess by now it's a couple weeks ago. It was in regards to our interview with Ken and Roberta Williams. And we received this email from Josh Koss, who some of you may remember was a guest on an episode about Quest for Glory quite a while back. It was actually a really good episode. We really liked having him on. He's a good friend of ours. So if you want to go back and find that, look for the episode on Quest for Glory with Quest for Glory superfans, Josh Koss and Hope Kodman. So he writes to us saying, "Hey Guilders, Josh Koss here, aka Orion, previous guest of the show and head admin of the Facebook group." That is correct. He is actually the head admin of the Classic Gamers Guild Facebook group. I'm sending in this email to talk about something that's kind of been on my mind after the Ken and Roberta episode. It's regarding the discussion of Mask of Eternity from that episode. Other Sierra games without a number in their title on the box is Quest for Glory 4. The box only reads Quest for Glory Shadows of Darkness. By your argument of just what's on the box, then there's Quest for Glory 1, 2, 3, and 5, and one unnumbered one that fits anywhere. I need to note sarcasm in that statement. Then there's Colonel's Bequest and Dagger of Amun-Ra, which have no numbering convention to them, but fans will frequently refer to them as Lorabo 1 and 2. You guys already mentioned Police Quest 4. Besides, Roberta Williams herself named it King's Quest 8 during your interview. I'll forgive you for not remembering, because if I was talking to her, I'd black out as well and would have to listen to it again to find out what I said. I will agree that it fits better if you think of it in terms of Solo or Rogue One to the rest of the Star Wars movies, but to discredit it as part of the series numbering because of what's on the box is just arguing semantics. And that's the end of the email. And I'll start on this one just by saying that everything that you said, Josh, is accurate. Those are facts. That is 100% true and correct. So the only thing I would say to address this is to make sure you don't misunderstand the intent behind why we say to not consider them as numbered in the series. In terms of King's Quest 8 and Police Quest 4, I think it is in their benefit to not consider them numbered because the number doesn't show up on the box, because it is actually advantageous to them and defends the way that they stray from the rest of the series. So a lot of people are actually disappointed in Police Quest Open Season and King's Quest Mask of Eternity because they are so different and veer so far away from the previous games in that series. And I usually bring it up as defense, not to discredit them, but to say, hey, these aren't continuations of that story. They are set in the same universe, absolutely. So I'm not trying to kick them out of the universe. They absolutely are. I just say that, hey, if you're having problems thinking of Police Quest Open Season as being like, oh, it's too different, or if you think of King's Quest Mask of Eternity as, oh, that's not like the other King's Quest, it might help just to say, hey, maybe if you don't think of it as Police Quest 4, or if you don't think of it as King's Quest 8, just think of it as these are games that just happen to be in the same universe but are completely different stories and are free to play with the formula and try different new things. That's all I'm getting at when I say, hey, you know what? These aren't actually numbered. Of course, there is a lot of inconsistency. I cannot explain to you why Quest for Glory Shadows of Darkness does not say Quest for Glory 4. I never worked at Sierra. I've never asked anyone who worked there about this in particular. I don't know what their answer would be. I don't think, for whatever reason that they chose not to say Quest for Glory 4 on the box, I don't think is necessarily applicable to Police Quest or King's Quest when they did it. So I don't know, but I really think that these are just isolated incidents and not necessarily tied into some greater scheme of numbering conventions and some I don't think it's deliberate in that way. So again, I'm not trying to take these games down or to discredit them as being part of their series. I'm just saying that if you remove the number from them, because on the box they're not there, it makes it easy to remove the numbers from them. It just makes it easier to accept that they are wildly different from the predecessors.
And I would just add to that by that logic, which I agree with, and I think it's a nice way to look at it, because Police Quest 4 and King's Quest 8 are so removed that it's, it is in their defense, and it does explain why the series diverts so much from the originals, that Space Quest 6 should just be Space Quest: The Spinal Frontier, and that would solve a lot of issues. And also, I would also say that there is just 7 King's Quests and then Connor's Quest. That's it.
It's true, although on the offside of that, if King's Quest 8 was Mask of Eternity and I didn't think of it as King's Quest 8, I wouldn't have bought it.
Would you not have bought it if it was just King's Quest Mask of Eternity?
I don't know that I would have. Well, I guess maybe because it just, well, yeah, I know that. But in my head, I was looking forward to King's Quest 8, and that's the whole reason I bought it. I wouldn't, okay, so I'm reading the Outlander series, and I love all the books in it, but occasionally she puts in these little feeder stories that are the stories between the books. And I don't read them because they're not necessary and they're not really a part of the actual lore of what I'm looking into maybe, or maybe it's not a part of the main storyline. And for that reason, if it was just King's Quest Mask of Eternity and I didn't think of it as 8, I might not have bought it.
Yeah, and that's fine. You can think of it that way if you want. Whatever helps you enjoy something better is correct.
Exactly.
If you want to think of it as King's Quest 8, then do so. If you want to think of it as Police Quest 4, then do so.
I don't want to, actually, not at all. I think of it, Mask of Eternity is completely separate. Now I'm like, no, if you didn't consider it a part of the series, it's much better off as soon as you try to think of it as being part of the series, Police Quest 4 included. No. So on the one hand, I wouldn't have played them, but on the other hand, would I have been missing much if I didn't?
I don't know. You told me you actually liked King's Quest 8. So.
I did. I liked it for what it was, but I didn't it would still be my 8th most favorite King's Quest game.
Yeah.
You liked it once you got over the disappointment.
The other one too I want to touch on real quick is Lorabo 1 and 2. I actually really I'm not so argumentative about it because I get what people mean when they say Lorabo 1 and 2, but I have never actually considered them Lorabo 1 and 2. I've considered them Colonel's Bequest and Dagger of Amun-Ra.
Totally.
And they are Lorabo mysteries. And I think
it's like
maybe if you dig back, you can possibly find that I said like LB1 or LB2 just for the sake of abbreviation because I didn't want to type it all out.
Right.
But even still, I will more often than not refer to them as CB and DOAR. Like, I don't really call them Lorabo 1 or Lorabo 2. But at the same time, like you said, arguing semantics, I'm not going to argue semantics because if somebody says Lorabo 1, I'm not going to be like, huh? What are you talking about? Right. I don't know a Lorabo 1. Which one? This Colonel's Bequest or this Dagger of Amun-Ra? I'm not one of those people. Like, I know what you mean, so I'm going to let it pass. I'm not going to argue saying like, no, you're not allowed to call it that. You must call it. It's, I'm just going to, if you say Lorabo 1, I know what you mean. And maybe it's very possible I might have said LB1 or LB2 just to quickly get through it because typing on a phone sucks and I hate it. I usually want to get through it as quick as possible. But most of the time I will still call it CB and DOAR or Dagger and leave it at that. So yeah, I don't consider it Lorabo 1 and 2. Not that they aren't spiritually 1 and 2 of a Lorabo series, but because it's never been on the box, I just never regarded it as official titling.
Yeah, I'd never actually thought about it before, how neither of them have a number, and it's making me wonder, again, not that it matters at all, because I think they're isolated mysteries, isolated episodes, whatever you want to call it, and they're both just amazing. So, again, it doesn't matter at all, but that being said, just because it's fun to speculate on old things that don't leave us much to speculate on anymore, I wonder if there's clues or direct, not even clues, but just any direct one way or the others in say Dagger of Amun-Ra that lets you know that it was later in her life, because I feel like there's something that where you feel like she's older and has grown, but I'm not sure if that's a feeling or if it was said. Because
in Colonel's Bequest she was still a student at Tulane University, and in Dagger of Amun-Ra she has moved to New York. I believe it was New York. Was it New York? She moved, I believe, to well, anyways, at any rate, she's now in her career as a journalist.
Right.
Got it. Okay. That's good. Yeah, and actually, it's really, thanks for pointing that out, and that's a really good way to do it too. Because, like I said, I felt like she had grown, but it wasn't overly on the nose. I didn't feel like I was told that. It was just kind of a natural. Now my character is a little bit older, a little bit wiser.
Well, I think there wasn't enough connection because that's why I never really considered them 1 and 2. It's not that they aren't. Of course they are. Dagger takes place after Colonel's Bequest, and it's the same character. I'm not saying that they aren't connected, but she seems to have no real recollection of the Colonel's Bequest. Like they don't seem to do anything to acknowledge that the original game happened. So I just take it as sort of like, here's one, here's another, same character, just do whatever. So
I would have loved in Dagger after the first body was found for her just to scream, "Oh my God, it's happening again!"
Or her to just not even respond by that point. She's just so numb to it all by now.
Yeah.
It's like, oh crap.
Not more deaths, jeez.
But yeah, so in the end, yeah, it is arguing semantics. It's not even arguing semantics. It's just sort of using semantics to say, hey, you know what? Whatever makes you feel better, just believe that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can defend it by saying, like, if you thought that Open Season was a good game, just not a police quest, or if you think that, you know, I've heard people say Mask of Eternity was a pretty good game, just not a King's Quest. You could defend it just by saying, hey, it's not in the progression because it's called King's Quest Mask of Eternity. It's called Police Quest Open Season, and it can help you enjoy it a little bit more if you know that it was just sort of like, you know, they have the right to detour and they have the right to do something different. So yeah, that's all I'm trying to say by that. Anyways, so what do you think about all of this stuff that we've just discussed? We've covered a lot of ground here. Let us know. We are on Facebook. We are a page and we are a group, the Classic Gamers Guild. You can write us by email at mail@classicgamersguild.com. You can find us on Twitter at the CG Guild. Find us on Instagram at CGG Podcast. We are on Patreon. If you would like to support the show, just look up Classic Gamers Guild over at patreon.com. We thank all of our supporters. We have a fair number now. Every little bit counts, so it does add up. It covers our monthly bills at the very least. But there are also a couple in our extra special thanks tier, namely Mark Fillion and Jay Holmes. Thank you guys so much. Your contributions are very generous, and we really, really appreciate those. That aside, any final thoughts?
I think play games with your kids. Play the games you enjoy, and they'll pay attention. If you're into classic games and you get them when they're young enough, they'll still think they are cool. Just don't introduce the classic games when your kid is 10 years old. It's too late by then. That's my final thought. Yeah,
and if they don't like it, say it's either this or making a pair of Nikes for somebody. So sit down and bloody enjoy it.
Oh.
And can we keep that? Okay. What else? Bloody Black Capia. Don't forget to back Capia. I said it the second time weirdly because the first time I think I said Black Capia. That's not the name.
That is exactly what you said, and I was thoroughly confused.
Back Capia, right? It actually looks really cool, and I like that you can play as two different characters from two different perspectives on the story. So it's a really neat little dynamic I've not seen in a while, if ever. So bloody back that, and don't do murder.